why she ended up shooting her husband. I mean, you don't really have to explain to me, I know. Kia ora everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Renee, and today we're going to be doing a November wrap up. And if you're new here, welcome. It's great to have you. Hope you have a good time. November was a really busy reading month. I read 10 books, and now I know that that's too many books for me. I can't handle that many stories going round and round in my head, so definitely won't be doing that again. Kind of easing into the rest of the year and just being chill about it. Let's just get straight into it. The first book that I read in November was Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, a translated piece of fiction from the Polish. Much beloved, but also equally kind of, I don't want to say hate, because I feel like hate is such a strong word to use with a book, but I guess some people do hate books. I didn't hate this book, but I didn't love it. It is a story set in Poland, in a very kind of remote area where the weather is very harsh during the winter times. It's being narrated by an elderly character who acts as the caretaker for local houses in the area. She is convinced that these mysterious deaths that are happening are being executed by the local animals who are seeking revenge on the local hunters in the area. A very unbelievable, far out idea that can only be proposed by someone who is as deeply into astrology as our main character is. But she, not convincingly, but she slowly and with conviction starts to convince people or get people around to the idea that this could be potentially what is happening. And the reader as well. Although I was less convinced and more curious as to how and why she thought this. She is very much the person driving the story, and at times you often forget that what she might be saying might not be quite accurate. Yeah, I don't know what it was about this book. I think the slow pace of it was just really what put me off. I got bored quite quickly. I think the first 100 pages were really good. The writing is really good, but I don't know. I feel like it could have been 70 pages shorter. Yeah, that would have been good for me. Just an okay start to the month for me. The next book that I read in November was McGlue by Ottess and Moshfegh. I read this as part of Novellas in November, a fun little reading challenge created by Rick McDonald here on YouTube, where you read novellas in November. I guess an alternative to non-fiction November. So I was down for this. I love a short book, and this one literally says a novella on the front, so it was a no-brainer. This book was gross and disgusting, and I loved it. It's typical Moshfegh character, very unforgiving, very dirty, gritty, not someone that you want to meet on the street or in an alleyway, but somehow she makes you want to read about them. And that's what I like about Moshfegh. She forces you to kind of be confronted by these unsavory characters in her stories, and have to sit through their descriptions of really gross things. Like, this is probably the grossest of her books that I've read. And I would say if you enjoy that style of Moshfegh character and the way she writes them and kind of how transfixed you can become by them, then give this little guy a go. I didn't say what it's about. It's about a character named McGlue. He wakes up in the hold of a ship, drunk and covered in somebody else's blood. He's then being accused of murdering his best friend. He has no memory of this. an alcoholic who doesn't know how to function without booze in his system, a bottle in his hand, very manipulative towards his family, his friends, and someone that we love to hate. Typical Moshfegh. Really good. Really liked it. The next novella that I read in November was Ties by Domenico Starnone. This one I truly adored. I read Trust by Starnone last month, and that was like a little taster of his writing style and the types of themes he likes to explore in his writing. But I felt like this is him at his best with his writing. It's a story about a marriage that has fallen apart at some point and then come back together, and we are learning about what has fractured it and what ways, and from the different characters involved, their perspectives. Starnone likes to write about difficult, dysfunctional and complicated relationships, and I'm all here for it. His characters in this story are written in a way that is, unlike Moshfegh, so sympathetic and so understanding. Sorry about that, I had to go and have something to eat. I was talking about this, can't really remember where I got up to, but this was brilliant storytelling, very heartbreaking, honest writing. The opening chapter is from the wife's perspective as her husband is leaving her, and I could have sworn that it was written by a woman. Just how good it was. I think this is probably one of my top 5 reads of the year. Also heard that Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante is the companion novel to this one and is told from the wife's perspective. Much of the story is written from the husband's perspective, which was really good. So I'd be keen to read that next and see how they kind of fit together. Loved it. Then I read 5 tiny books, and I did a reading vlog on them, so I'm probably not going to talk about them a lot. I'm just going to try and get through them really quickly. The first one that I read was Assembly by Natasha Brown. The main character in this is a young black British woman who works in the finance sector. She has a boyfriend who comes from a completely different world to her, and this is kind of a day in her life as she kind of travels to be with his family, and her kind of understandings of how she navigates that world, the things she kind of has to deny of herself in order to make advances, I would say. Yeah, I thought it was okay. I wasn't blown away by it. I thought that there were some really interesting ideas that maybe have tried to have been explored in writing recently, but not as well as this. But at the same time, I don't know. I felt like it could have been much longer, and maybe it didn't benefit from being a short book. It could have been extended. Really love the writing though. Lots of dog ears on that one. The next book that I read in November was This Is Pleasure by Mary Gaitskill. This is a nuanced examination of the relationship between a man who is being accused of sexual harassment, sexual inappropriateness by several women, and the relationship he has with an old friend, Margot, who's a woman, and her kind of reckoning with that relationship, the things that he's done, and what that means for her. Initially, I was really kind of not confused, but thought that it was looking at this from a very kind of black or white point of view, and felt like it was quite excusatory. But the more that I've spoken with people about it, thought about it, the more nuanced I understand it is, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was The Cook by Maylis the Kerangal. This is a fun little story about a young self-taught French chef and his career. It was a really kind of accurate depiction of how harsh and taxing that kind of career can be, but also how fulfilling and rewarding it can be for those that choose to do it for a living. Cooking for people and feeding people is something that I know a lot of chefs love to do and is a big part of why they do it, and I think this little book captured that really well. I had lots of fun reading this. It was a nice kind of change of pace and I really enjoyed it. Would recommend if you have ever worked in hospitality or in a kitchen. Kind of, yeah, it felt really kind of accurate to me. The next book that I read was Bluets by Maggie Nelson. I did not get along with this at all. It just wasn't for me. It was very fragmentary but very disjointed. I felt like the flow of it was really hard to kind of grasp, and the premise, the idea of it, the idea of these kind of meditations on Maggie's love for the colour blue, references to art and thinkers, all sounded perfect and something that I would really enjoy, but I just didn't. There was something about it that I just couldn't grasp onto it, and I think it was the form. I think it was the way that it was written in like listed points, numbered points, and I got really bored of that really quickly. And by the end it was kind of like, yeah, that was nice, but not my favourite. The last tiny book that I read was The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. This was a weird, wonderful, playful little tiny book, and I loved it so much. It plays so much with the idea of narration, storytelling, and I don't know, I think it kind of pokes a bit of fun at the power and authority that writers feel like they have. I feel like Lispector was really poking fun at herself as a writer, or maybe not herself specifically, but other writers that she knows, maybe specifically male writers. The story opens with our narrator who is telling us that he's about to tell us something. He's about to tell us the story about this character who he has created, a fictional character, and he constantly reminds us that he is the one in control of the story. When he starts to tell the story, he then comes back out of it and he reminds us. He's always trying to put himself at the center of this, and yet somehow his fictional character that he's created manages to overshadow him. This character is named McGlue. She is endearingly naive and sweet despite her impoverished living situation. She's very poor. She doesn't really have a lot of self-confidence or think very highly of herself. Things don't really pan out for her all that well often, and yet she has this kind of eternal optimism that you can't help but love, and also it breaks your heart at the same time. I really love this book. Very weird. I would definitely recommend reading the introduction to help you understand what's going on. I was really confused for most of it, but I really loved it. Also forgot to say that these 5 tiny books I read as a part of Jessica's Tiny Book Challenge, which was a week of reading tiny books, and I read 5, which is probably why I feel burnt out. After tinies, I went back to novellas and I read 2 more novellas. The first one that I read was The Promise by Silvina Ocampo. This was another weird and wonderful little story that completely kind of took me by surprise. It is being narrated by a woman who has fallen overboard of a ship and is floating in the ocean. As she's there, she makes a promise to Saint Rita that if she survives, she'll write this story. The story is her, I guess, as a way of survival, remembering the people in her life. It's a very kind of step back approach to the storytelling, unlike The Eye of the Star, where the narrator constantly kept putting himself in the middle of it. This narrator is telling the story from a distance. She never really puts herself in these memories all that much, and you start to wonder whether or not a lot of what she is saying is accurate or true, whether these are actually her own memories or not. It was one of those books that when I finished it, I definitely had to go read some Goodreads reviews. But in the end, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't what I was expecting, but when I think about the way it was written and the way that the story was told, I think I liked it. Yeah. Okay, the last book that I read in November was The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginzburg. This is a little bookstagram, booktube darling. So many people read this book and loved it, and I really enjoyed it. I think my expectations were probably set a little high, but the more I think about a book afterwards, the more I kind of get out of it. I need to kind of simmer on it, and I've simmered on this the last few days, and the more I think about it, the more I know that I did really actually enjoy it. It is the story of a wife and mother who is in a marriage that she is no longer satisfied with. Her husband is very distant and does not seem to see how unhappy she is. The whole story is her kind of explaining from the moment she shoots her husband in the very opening of the book, from that point to the start, and then background to that point. So she kind of opens with shooting her husband, and then she goes back to then explain how it got to that point. I think I was expecting a lot more kind of poetic, prosy writing with very kind of deep, emotional, kind of hard, straight to the heart lines. That's not what this is. The writing style of it is very kind of detached and short and sharp, and there's not a lot of fuss given to the language or the way that Ginzburg has written this story. And I quite liked that. It set an interesting tone to the whole book, one that allows you as the reader to understand more the state of mind that this main character is in, and just kind of how you would understand why she ended up shooting her husband. I mean, you don't really have to explain to me, I know, but that use of language, or that real minimizing of the language and the way that it's used, was so intentional. I think sometimes it could be like brushed off as being quite boring or very simplistic, and I wouldn't say it's boring, I would say it's simplistic, but it does what it's supposed to do. And yeah, the more that I've thought about this book, the more that I really enjoyed that about it. So those are the 10 books that I read this month. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought, whether you agree with what I've said or disagree, if you liked them, if you hated them, and what was your favourite read of November. Also, let me know what you're planning on giving this year for Christmas. Are you giving books? Do you have other plans? I need ideas. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ka kite!